Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on healthy eating. I'm looking at it from the African perspective. And thank you again for coming in. So I do want to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement. The land that I live and work on is actually has been a site of human activity since time immemorial. It is the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation. Ontario, as we know it today, is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements, and is home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. These treaties and other agreements, including the One Dish with One Spoon, One Spoon Belt Covenant, are agreements to peacefully share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. We are mindful of broken covenant, and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or generations past. And for this particular group of people, I would also like to acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, and therefore I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. Thank you. Now, a little about me. So my name is Linda Akuamoah-Boateng, and I do have a bachelor's degree in nutrition and food science, and a master's degree in nutrition from University of Ghana. And then I migrated to Canada after my master's and did the internationally educated dietitians program at Rice University. I have been working as a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator at Rexdale Community Health Center for the past 14 years. And during that time, I have served a lot of clients with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, people with PCOS, and other metabolic disorders. In addition to seeing clients one-on-one, I do a lot of community presentations and build a lot of partnerships, working with people at places where I would meet them, whether it's places of worship or their homes or physicians' offices or pharmacies alike. I am a member of the College of Dietitians of Ontario, the Dietitians of Canada, and Diabetes Educator section of Diabetes Canada. So what are we going to do today? We're going to try and go through what diabetes is, look at what it means to live with diabetes, how do we eat healthy with diabetes, focusing on African diet, and also we're going to look at both big and small nutrients because both the large and the small nutrients are the ones that keeps our body healthy. We will do a little spotlight on some specific food items and nutrients. So we'll look at cooking oils, we'll look at organ meat, we'll look at sodium in the context of the African diet. We'll do a little review of some meal ideas, look at the role of exercise and stress in managing diabetes. So what is diabetes? It is a condition in which your body is not able to regulate the amount of sugar in the blood. And we know that high sugar or low sugar can lead to short and long-term issues with the body. Now let's look at what happens to glucose or sugar when we eat, right? So most of the foods that we eat, so this is before somebody is diagnosed with diabetes. Most of the foods that we eat do contain natural sugar, what we call glucose, right? And when you eat them, it kind of breaks down into the glucose and it enters your bloodstream. Now, it's important to know that we do need glucose because it's a source of energy for our body cells. And glucose on its own, so you see the sugar in the middle here, that's representing glucose. Glucose on its own, once it breaks down, it goes into your blood, but on its own, it cannot go into your muscles or your cells. It needs a hormone, which is made by the pancreas called insulin, which also comes into your blood, attaches itself to the glucose molecules, and then that is able to carry it into your body cells, and that's how you are able to get energy. Now, for people with diabetes, there's a little bit of a different or a shift. You would eat the same amount of food, you're getting the same amount of sugar, but you can see that for people with diabetes, the amount of insulin produced is a little bit less. So we're talking of those with type 2 diabetes. People with type 1 diabetes don't have any insulin coming in at all. The cells that make insulin in the pancreas are destroyed. That's why for those with type 1 diabetes, every time they eat or when they're diagnosed from day one, they have to go on insulin injections. But with type 2, you do make some insulin, but you may not be making enough, right? So then what happens is that you have this sugar in your blood, more sugar sitting in your blood because you don't have enough of the insulin to carry the sugar from the food that you ate. So then your blood sugar goes up. Something else that could happen with people with type 2 diabetes too is that sometimes your body cells don't respond to the insulin that you make very well. So we call that insulin resistant. So with type 2 diabetes, there could be a problem of insulin production where there's an inadequate amount of insulin produced, or there could be a problem of insulin resistance where your body cells are not able to recognize your own insulin very well. Now, when we talk about managing diabetes, right, that's a big umbrella word because diabetes happens to have a lot of components to its management. And the most important thing is that it's a self-managed disease. You have to take an interest in your diabetes. All the choices that you make each day can impact your blood glucose level, right? Taking care of your diabetes means making healthy food choices, being physically active, monitoring your glucose, taking your medication if you need, if something that's been prescribed for you, right? The goal here is to make sure that you feel well today, because it's one day at a time, but in the long run, we also want to make sure that we are preventing or delaying any complications that are usually associated with uncontrolled blood sugar in the future. What we're going to do here, continuing from here going on, is to focus on how do we make healthy choices from an African perspective. Now, I have to say here that as much as this is the African perspective, this doesn't cover all of Africa. It's a continent of 54 countries. And we have different cultures, different languages, different food traditions, and the way we prepare our foods may be different. But one thing that could be common for all of us from Africa is that a lot of the staples that we use, be it corn, cassava, plantain, rice, or the beans and the legumes, or the green leafy vegetables, the okras, the oils, tend to be very similar across the continent. So whilst we may call them by different names or prepare them different ways, the main ingredients tend to be the same, and therefore the nutrient could be very, very similar. Now, when it comes to diabetes, the key component is making sure that we are getting good nutrition, right? It's a huge part of it. Many of us, when we eat food, they do contain nutrients that affect our blood sugar levels. Our food choices, our food habits, our behaviors they are all affected by different things that have happened in our lives or different factors. Our cultures, what do we need in terms of our dietary requirements? What recommendations have we been told by our health providers? What is our personal health history? What is our income? What environment we live in? So all of that kind of affect the foods that we make. So when it comes to diabetes, we try to, as much as possible, to individualize nutrition advice, considering all the things that I've spoken about. Now, if you want to find a specific dietary pattern that works for your body or your circumstance, I would say that it's important to speak with a dietitian or a diabetes educator who happens to be a dietitian, because then they can work with you to make sure that you're managing your diabetes, but at the same time, you're getting all the nutrients that you need for your body, right? Focusing on healthy eating, it's always a matter of what, when, and how much to eat. Now, when do we eat, right? So when to eat is as important as what we eat and how much we eat. Most of our bodies respond best to regular intake of food over the course of the day, right? So it's great to aim for 3 meals a day. You spread it over 4 to 6 hours apart. Some people may need snacks in between their meals, and it's a good idea that at each meal you try to have a balance of all the different food groups, and we'll look into that as we go on. We'll have an idea of what a balanced meal means and what the different food groups mean, or what to add to what meal. So we'll talk about that, right? Eating at regular times helps you to control your blood sugars. So it's important to make sure that we're eating a variety of foods from all the different food groups. And when I talk of food groups, I mean our vegetables and our fruits, our grains and our starches, the milk and alternatives, and the meat and alternatives, so or plant protein, right? So for each meal, it's a good idea to try to get a good balance by including at least 3 or 4 of these food groups in your meal, right? So now with an African angle, this is an African heritage diet pyramid that I got from Old Ways, which is an organization in the US that has tried to work with the African Caribbean community and came up with this food diagram based on what was reported as the usual food intake. So you look at it and you see all the vegetables, all the fruits, all the grain products, and we're going to kind of compare this to the recommendations we have in Canada here with our plate as well. So you would see that there's a lot of green vegetables in there, and they kind of form the basis of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid. You have all the other vegetables and fruits. You have the legumes, the beans, the lentils in there, the whole grains, there is fish. And as you go up, you see the size reduces in terms of what to eat more often. And then of course, the drink is water. Now, why do we need to eat healthy? Because that's very important. Now, I say that it's important to eat healthy because all the different food groups, why do we have to include them? Because they are the ones that end up providing the body with the important nutrients that we need. One of the things that people tend to focus on when they have diabetes is all about carbohydrates and how they need to reduce it or how they need to cut it out of their food or things like that. You can still have good carbohydrates in your diet and just watch the portions that you eat at a meal, right? So knowing that I can have my carbohydrates, but I can choose healthy ones is very important, right? All these food groups end up giving us all these vitamins and minerals. They give us carbohydrates, they give us fat, they give us protein. And our body needs all of these nutrients for the day-to-day function. Now, how much do we eat? right? So this is what Diabetes Canada recommends, and it's actually even the new Canada's food guide is based on the plate model as well. So ensuring that half of your plate is filled up with your vegetables, right? Half of your plate, if whatever plate you're using, whether it's 6-inch or 7-inch or 9-inch, just make sure that visualize it, divide it into two, fill half of it with your vegetable. And then the other half, you divide again into two, you fill one part, a quarter of it with your protein, and then the other quarter of it with your grain. And what do you want to drink? Your drink of choice, again, should be water. If you don't want it, sometimes some of the foods that we eat, it's very difficult to visualize it on the plate because you end up eating it in a bowl. So then that's where the hand portion comes in, where your starch and grain is like your fist. So a fist of your hand, whether you're eating your fufu or you're eating your banku or your gali or eba, you want to make sure it's a fist of your hand. And then your vegetables will fill your two handfuls, right? And then your meat or your fish or your plant protein should be like the palm of your hand. So like a deck of cards, if you put it in the palm of your hand, and the thickness of your little finger, not this high, you're not building a tower, just the thickness of your hand. And if you use any oil in cooking or butter or margarine, then you want to just use a little bit, just the tip of your tongue. I know sometimes we cook in bulk for the whole family, but just be mindful of that, or you cook in bulk for a few days. Still be mindful of how much oil you're using overall. Now, this is an example of how the plate can look like if we were to put some meal on it. So we have some jollof rice and some chicken. So you see that the jollof rice is only filling a quarter of the plate. The chicken is also filling a quarter of the plate, and there's a variety of vegetables that is on half of the plate. I know usually people would have the whole rice on the plate, and then they'll put the chicken on top and maybe a little bit of vegetables somewhere. Now let's look at the different foods in detail. Carbohydrate, right? That's the big one, the carbs, starches, the grains, or the different foods, the different names that we give it, right? So they have the greatest and immediate effect on your blood sugar, right? So it's very important that you spread them throughout the day. So that's why we talked about not skipping your meals, because if you skip and you eat a big one, then it's going to impact your blood sugar. We want to have a variety of foods at each meal. When you're choosing your carbohydrate, you want to choose the high fiber ones like whole grain. So your brown rice, your parboiled rice, your wheat, your millet, the oatmeal, the sorghum, the teff, all the different grains that we have on the continent and the ones that we have seen coming here, wild rice, buckwheat, bulgur, spelt, kamut, all of them are really good grains to have through the day, right? You also want to, if you're eating your tubers, your roots and tubers, so your plantains, your potatoes, your yam, the cocoyam, the edos, the cassava, all of them are also carbohydrate foods. So it's also you need to be mindful of how much you eat of that meal at a time. Food that you make from these also tend to be high in carbohydrates. So if you made fufu out of cassava or yam, corn, just be mindful that because it's coming from these products, it is going to be a high carbohydrate food. So you need to watch the portions of that. If you made porridges from wheat or millet or sorghum or corn, again, be mindful that it is a carbohydrate food, and therefore the more we eat, the more sugar would end up in our blood. So that's just a note, something to be aware of. And then of course we have the fruits and the fruit juices. You do want to limit how much juice you take if you have diabetes. If you can avoid it, I say avoid it, but I know sometimes we go out to programs or in the summer it's hot and all those things, and people do want to have a little bit here and there. Just be mindful. The reason why we try to say if you can stay away is that the more processed the fruit is, the easier the sugar gets into your blood when you drink it. So chewing the whole fruit itself is much better, because then you have to chew it and then it would break down in your stomach before the sugar would end up going through your intestine and the blood. So there's a little bit of a slower release when it's a whole fruit compared to if it's just a fruit juice. That's why when somebody's having a low blood sugar, we tell them drink juice, drink juice, drink juice. Why? And because within 5-10 minutes, the sugar comes up. Why? Because it's that quick. So just be mindful of that. We do say you could have up to 3 fruits a day. I mean, you can work with your dietitian to see if you need more or less, depending on your blood sugar or what your nutrition goals are. But the general recommendation is about 3 servings, and that's like a medium apple, pear, an orange, papaya, a small banana. If you like pineapple, then like a 3/4 cup or something like that. And incorporating all that as part of healthy eating is very important, because like we said, they bring different kinds of nutrients, and having the variety ends up making sure that at the end of the day, you have enough of the different nutrients that you need. Back to the carbohydrate, there's a milk and alternatives, which again, does provide some carbohydrates, so the milk sugar, lactose, but it also gives you the calcium and vitamin D, because it's fortified here in Canada. So it's important to include some of those in your diet as well. Your milk, your yogurt, all of that is very important as well. And then of course, some sweet desserts and snack foods do also provide carbohydrate. We all know that all those cakes and cookies and all those things, they are also carbohydrate foods, because they will provide you sugar in your blood. Now, if you happen to be going back to the milk, if you happen to be lactose intolerant, then you can try the fortified milk products. So they have the soy, they have the almonds, they have rice milk, there's oat milk, there's so many options out there now. Now, when you're drinking those, with the exception of soy milk, it would just probably be for the calcium and the vitamin D, the fortified version. Those other milk products like almonds or rice or oats don't necessarily have enough protein in them, whereas cow's milk and soy milk tend to have, soy milk is pretty equal up there in terms of protein with the regular cow's milk. Now, coconut milk, I know that's another one that people in the African community may be using. Just know that it's not fortified, so there is no calcium or vitamin D in it, and it tends to be higher in fat, especially the saturated fat. So that's just something for you to be mindful of. And then there's a condensed milk, which some people may use in their porridges and other things. So again, that is more of a sweetener than a milk, because it has more sugar. So just be mindful. So these, when you're getting your yogurt, try to choose the low fat one, opt for plain one, and add your own fruit. So if you buy the plain yogurt, you cut up your banana or your blueberries or your apples, strawberries. That way you control how much sugar is in there, because any yogurt that is flavored on the market, it does have some added sugar. So you just want to be mindful of that. Now, the Greek yogurt on the market, if you can afford it, has a little bit more protein and less carbohydrate than a regular yogurt. So that's also an information that I wanted to pass along. If you can afford Greek yogurt, go for it. It's a little bit more expensive, but the regular yogurt, the plain regular yogurt, is also okay to have. That I just put a note here. So when you have the beans all the different chickpeas and black-eyed peas and cowpeas, bambara beans, lentils, kidney beans. They do have protein and they're very high in fiber, which is a form of carbohydrate, but they do have some carbohydrates too. If you're not eating too much of it at a meal, then I wouldn't worry so much about it. If you're not on insulin where you're doing insulin carb ratio, especially for people with type 1, then I would not worry so much about it. But that's just something for you to note, that the beans do contain some carbohydrate, but they're really high in fiber and protein as well. And it's fiber. We hear so much about fiber these days, and it's important, so I just wanted to highlight it. It is a form of carbohydrate, right? So fiber, it's important. Why? Because it slows the digestion of food, and for people with diabetes, it's very, very important because you don't want your blood sugar to spike right after you eat it. We all know that the sugar goes up a little bit after eating, even in people without diabetes. So that's a normal process. But if you do have diabetes, you want to make sure that you would prefer that when you eat, your blood sugar doesn't spike right away or doesn't go up so high. So even if it goes up slowly and for a longer time. So that's what fiber does, including more fiber in your food. That's that for you. It delays stomach emptying, which is part of the slowing down. And so it helps you to stay full and more satisfied longer than if you had something that's more refined. People with cholesterol, it helps to lower the cholesterol, therefore reducing the risk of heart disease. And then, of course, with people with diabetes, it lowers our blood sugar. And then for people with constipation, fiber is really a good solution. It relieves it. It acts as a stool softener. So then it helps to bulk up the stool and helps it to pass more easily. And in recent times, one of the biggest benefits of fiber that we're hearing about more and more research is going on is gut microbiome. So we do have some important bacteria in our large intestines, in our colons, and these bacteria, they feed on fiber. They feed on fiber, and we know that these bacteria are involved in a lot of processes in our body. They help with inflammation, our brain function, our heart, so many things that are coming out with the gut microbiome. So what are some of the common foods that are high in fiber? You have your oats, your corn, the beans, the peas, the lentils, brown rice, barley, apples, all the different fruits. Of course, our whole grains. And when you're eating fruit, please try and keep the skin on. Do not peel the skin. Try and wash it as much as you can. Clean it and eat your apples with the skin. Eat your potatoes with the skin, because that's where the fiber and some of the good nutrients are. Don't peel it and throw it away. Okay. How much fiber do you need? As somebody living with diabetes, about 25 to 50 grams a day. And when you're out there buying your groceries or buying any packaged food, on the label, you may sometimes see the food would have a source of fiber or high source of fiber or very high source of fiber. What does it mean? A source of fiber, by the regulations of Canada, means that they could have 2 grams of fiber per serving. So if you pick the nutrition facts table and you look at the serving size, and the nutrition fact says it's 2 grams of fiber, then the company is allowed to put there that particular food is a source of fiber. But to say something is a high source, it has to have 4 grams, or a very high source, it has to have about 6 grams, the serving size of that. Now, another thing to be aware of when it comes to carbohydrate is something, especially for people with diabetes, is something called glycemic index. So this is basically how high a carbohydrate containing food would raise your blood sugar. Right? So some foods, when we eat, the sugar goes up really high fast. Some foods it's slow, and sometimes it's the carbohydrate content, the structure of the carbohydrate of that food that could impact how high the blood sugar goes. Now, having said that, if you're eating a mixed meal, if we make food made up of plantains and vegetables and all those things, and fat and protein, everything, one pot meal, or you eat it all together, the composition can also affect how high the sugar goes. Adding protein and fat or fiber to the food tends to lower the glycemic index of the food. And then if it's a refined food, then the glycemic index tends to be high because all the fiber has been stripped off of that food. So things like white bread or white rice tend to be a little bit more higher glycemic index than the brown rice or the brown bread or whole grain bread. Now, what are some of the foods that we commonly eat in Africa that are low GI? Because we want to choose more low GI. So things like your sweet potato, green plantain when it's boiled, green banana, breadfruit, parboiled rice, steel cut oat, bulgur, or barley. They all tend to be low GI when it comes to fruit. Things like oranges, banana, green banana, mango also tends to be low GI. But having said that, low GI is very important, but if you eat too much of that food, it could cause your sugar to go up. So even though normally you would not raise it high, if you're eating too much, something we call glycemic load. So if a food is low GI, but you eat too much of it, you end up having too much of the carbohydrates in your blood at the same time. So that could cause your sugar to still go high. So it's very important to work with a dietitian so they can walk you through this and give you some specific details for you as a person, right? And some foods that are medium, so we have low, and some are in between the low and the high. So something like plantain, when it's green and you boil it, it's low. When it's ripe and you boil it, it's medium. But when it's ripe and you fry it, it becomes high. So it's very important to know that. Another medium glycemic index would be like cocoyam or edos, potatoes when you bake it with the skin, brown rice or basmati or long grain rice, they also tend to be medium. And then of course you have your grapes or banana when it's ripe is also medium. But then the high ones, like I said, would be your ripe plantain when you fry it, cassava, white yam or yellow yam, and the jasmine rice, the perfumed rice. Now let's look at the vegetables, all of our greens, right? So all your okra, your spinach, all the different green leaves that we use in making the cocoyam leaves, the taro leaves, the colloids, kale, ofang, obono, all the different kinds of leafy vegetables that are out there that we use either on the continent or when we traveled here, migrated here, the ones we see on the market that we buy to use. It's very important to include that in our meals every day, whatever you call it, stew or soup or sauce, however we call it. Adding these vegetables is very, very important for us, right? So, and then you want to make sure that you prepare your veggies with little or no added fat, salt, or sugar. So you want to make sure that every meal, at least there's 2 servings of vegetables, especially at lunch and dinner. Most people don't really eat vegetables at breakfast. That's okay. If you do, please go ahead and enjoy it. If you don't, then make sure that at your lunch and your dinner, you always have some vegetables with it. It's very important, not just the fiber, but your vitamins and your minerals is equally important. Your other vegetables like okra, the eggplant, the bell pepper, the cabbages, mushrooms, whichever one that's out there, please enjoy them. they are equally beneficial for you. But just to emphasize, half of the plate is the vegetable, or if it's a bowl, then make sure that 2 of your hands full and you're putting it in. You can have more veggies. So this is just the minimum that we are recommending. But if you want to have more, certainly do go. If you ate and you feel like you're not full, instead of going for seconds and going for the carb, maybe try going for the vegetable. Okay, they do have very little or no carbohydrate, and therefore they don't impact your sugar significantly, your blood sugar significantly, unless you are adding sugar to your preparation. That's when you want to be mindful. Now, protein, right? A very important nutrient, one of the micronutrients, the big 3, so carbohydrate, fat, protein. It helps with our tissues, growth of our tissues. If we have an injury, proteins are responsible for repairing that injury. For people with diabetes, it helps us to prevent spikes. So I talked about your sugar rising slowly as opposed to really fast. Protein does that as well. And then it keeps you fuller for a longer time. So when you eat and there's no protein, you fall hungry faster than if you add some protein to it. Red meat, so that would be your goat meat, your pork, your beef. We want to try and limit it to at least 2 servings a week. We want to, and if you're buying your red meat, choose the lean cut, and also make sure that you're frying it less. Try to bake, try to broil, try to stew with little oil, try to saute. However you want to do it, it's very important. Just limit the deep fried version of it. We have the dried fish, the smoked dried fish, the snails, all those are forms of protein that is out there on the continent, and now a lot of them are actually imported here as well. So if you enjoy them, please do. But just make sure that you're limiting your red meat. You want to choose fish 2 or more times a week. Try to make sure that it's not deep fried again. Bake it, broil it. If you have an air fryer, use that one to do it as well. Your beans and your lentils, very, very important. It's good to have at least once or twice a week. Make it a non-meat or a non-fish day where you would have some beans. All the different bean stews that we used to consume is very important to do that as well. They do have the fiber, they have the protein, they are less in fat. So it's good to include that. And there's a lot of benefit out there about plant protein. Now, so adding that, nobody's saying become a vegetarian, but it is important and it's beneficial for you. So once or twice a week, have a non-meat day where you could have beans. You can make the bean stew, you can include it in your salad, throw some beans in your salad or things like that to make sure that you're having some of that as well. Now, how much do you need? It's a quarter of your plate or the palm of your hand, like we said, the thickness of your little finger. Now, I wanted to kind of highlight organ meat because it's very common in some of the African dishes, right? So some of them are nutritious. Some of them we needed to be mindful of the fact that it could be a significant source of saturated fat in your diet. So organ meat, that's the liver, the kidney, the tripes, or some people call it caul or intestine. That's considered organ meat. We have the cowhide, the wool, the pommel. Those ones tend to be really low in fat and high in collagen, but more the fat would be around the tripe and sometimes the cow foot. You could see all the visible fat. So try when you're using it to trim it as much as you can. If you're using the cow foot, parboil it, take it out, cut out the visible fat. The bone broth is very useful. You could cook it overnight, keep it in the fridge, let the oil settle on top and take it out and throw the oil away, and then you can use the broth in your soup or your stew. We do not let people eat these, so it's important to know what tips you can use to make sure that you're getting the best part out of it. Why? Because they're coming from animal, they are a source of protein, and it's a significant food for some people. They do have protein, they do have B vitamins, right? Some minerals as well. Just be cautious of the fact that it could be high in saturated fat, and therefore cholesterol could impact on your cholesterol level. And then for people with gout, they also tend to be a little bit high in purine, which is a specific amino acid that can build up and cause the flare up of gout. So again, just information to know. Nobody's saying stop eating. All we're saying is that try to limit how often you eat it. And if you do eat it, try and trim it as much as you can. Now, fat. That's the big one, right? So sometimes people wonder, is there any benefits to it at all? And I say, yes, it is a nutrient, right? It is a source of energy for our body. It brings texture to food. It makes us feel full for a longer time. And then some vitamins, the body cannot absorb them without fat. So something like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, or vitamin K, you do need fat in order to absorb it. What you want to do is choose healthier options of fat. So the unsaturated fat, right? Like your olive oils, your peanuts, your peanut butter, your soybean, your canola oil. Those are good because we know they don't cause a spike in your cholesterol levels. Your omega-3 fatty acids, which you would find in your fatty fishes like salmon or mackerel or herring or trout. Very important to have that. Omega-3, it's good for the health of our heart. It fights inflammation. So we want to make sure that we have some of that in our diet as well. You could find it in some plant foods like avocado, walnut, or ground flaxseed, or chia seeds. Canola oil does have some omega-3 as well. So including some of these in your diet is also very important. And it's an essential fatty acids because your body can get it only through food. So try to make sure that you're incorporating some of the examples that I just listed, which is your salmon, your mackerel, your trout, your herrings, or your walnuts, your ground flaxseed, your avocados in the diet to make sure that you're getting omega-3. You want to limit your trans fat and the saturated fat. So these are the ones that tend to bring up all the bad cholesterol. So reducing it would help us in our health journey for the heart as well, right? So when you would find these, a lot of the time when you buy meat and you see all that white, that visible fat in there, that tends more often to be saturated fat. Cakes, pastries tend to be higher, a little bit maybe higher in trans fat as well. So making sure that we're eating less of those foods is very, very important. Now let's talk about coconut oil and palm oil, which is hot topics everywhere you go. But for those who come from the continent, especially the Western part, these are really, really common oils that I used in cooking. And people still use it. One thing to note, they're both high in saturated fat. That is not disputed. That's a fact. I think What is in contention is whether, especially for palm oil, whether they're unrefined. So if you have the red palm oil, does it cause the same harm as the refined ones that we see in research? We don't know. We don't know. Why do I say that? Red palm oil, we know is rich in antioxidants, so vitamin E, beta carotene, which is vitamin A, and some phytochemicals, which we know are useful for the body in so many ways, but it also contains the saturated fat, which we know can raise your bad cholesterol level. So it's a balance of looking at, I do enjoy this. Maybe I'm not going to eat it every day, but I'm going to consume it once in a while. So balancing it that way. So I think that's the recommendation here. Try to limit how much you use and how often you use until we have more information, especially about the unrefined palm oil. But when it comes to coconut oil, you still do want to limit it. It has saturated fat. And I think there's a lot of information out there about coconut oil curing every illness on the face of the planet. You do want to be mindful. If anybody's telling you one single food item can do so many things, that should stop you in your tracks. It brings flavor for people who grew up on it. It's something that you're used to, but it's not that it solves all these health problems that is out there. Limiting the use, so reducing the quantity and the frequency is the key here. And then sodium. Sometimes we wonder what's the difference between sodium, salt, and sodium. Are they the same thing? So salt is an ingredient that we add to food. So you have your table salt, you have your sea salt, and then the seasonings, all those things contain salt. But sodium is a mineral that we find mostly in salt and food additives. So something like MSG, adobo, and all those things do contain sodium, right? Now, one thing to note is that all types of salt are sources of sodium, right? So sometimes I find people tell me, oh, I don't use table salt, I only use sea salt. It doesn't matter, it still has sodium. Whether you use sea salt, kosher salt, gourmet salt, Himalayan salt, smoked salt, just know that they all have sodium, and the sodium content is very, very similar. Like the difference is not significant. So if you're somebody who has been told to reduce your salt intake for whatever health reasons, please be mindful that moving from table salt to sea salt is not better than table salt, okay? We also find sodium in our seasonings. So the bouillon cubes, all those different cubes that we like to flavor our dishes with, be mindful that they contain sodium. So when you're cooking, if you're using those seasonings, then maybe stay away from the salt. That way, make sure, be mindful that canned foods, so the canned fishes, the canned mackerels, the sardines, the corned beef, the luncheon meat, fermented fish or salted fish. So the stock fish that are salted, the Kobe's, the momones, all of them, the pickled meat, whether it's pickled beef or pickled pork feet or whatever, they all do contain sodium. So if you've been told to watch your sodium, then that's something that you want to be mindful of. And when you have diabetes, because diabetes is an independent risk factor for high blood pressure, we usually tell you to be mindful of how much added sodium you're having in your diet. Now, what you want to try and do in trying to reduce your sodium intake is choosing herbs and spices instead. So how we traditionally will season the food with ginger, onion, garlic, cilantro, the mint, the basils, the parsleys, the coriander. Make your own seasoning. Try and experiment and see. And the longer you season the food, if you're able to do it overnight, your meat or your fish, the more you realize that you don't even need that much salt for it to taste good. because when you put those spices on it and you leave it for an hour or two or overnight, they go in and you really get the good flavors. So be mindful of that. When you go out and you buy processed food or restaurant food or takeout, again, be mindful that they do have sodium. It's not that you cannot eat it. If you're on a reduced sodium diet, you can, if you're going into a fine dining restaurant, you can make them aware that you want them to reduce how much salt they are adding to your food. Also know that you could get sodium from some breads or breakfast cereals, crackers. Some crackers, you can even see the salt molecules or particles on the face of the crackers. Some sweets and some baked product can also have sodium in there, right? So choosing your fresh or frozen or unprocessed food tends to be lower in sodium. You want to look for words such as sodium-free or low sodium or reduced sodium or no added salt on the package. When you're at home and you're cooking, try to avoid adding salt at the beginning of your meal. When you cook and you're done, you can taste it. And then if you need to add salt, then you do. Why? Because a lot of the time you season the meat and sometimes you may have fish seasoning and all those things. And when you're making the soup and you add salt at the beginning, by the time you add the meat or maybe the canned vegetable or something, it may be too late to go back. So finish the cooking, taste it, and if you think you need to add a little bit more salt, then you can do that. Try to make sure that you take away the salt shaker from your table. Because when you do this, you really have no idea how much salt you're putting in there, right? So that's important. If you have to use your pickled or fermented or salted fish or meat, please soak it overnight, boil it, discard the water and boil again before you use it in your meals as well. Now let's put it all together. So eating healthy, right? We do want to aim for 3 meals a day. If you like eating snacks, then that's okay. You can have them in between your meals as well. You just want to make sure that your snack is at least 2 hours away from your meal, especially for your blood sugar, because you don't want to stack it up. You don't want to have a snack at 11 and eat your whatever at 12. Could make your sugar look a little bit higher than it's supposed to be because we didn't give enough time for the snack to settle. Unless the snack is a protein food. Like if you had some nuts, then that's okay. Go ahead and have your meal. You want to, again, have the balanced foods. So incorporating all the different food items, eating more vegetables, choosing your lean protein, adding your legumes, so your chickpeas, kidney beans, bambara beans, tofu into your meals 2 times a week. The oils, we talked about it. Choose the healthier ones more often. Eat smaller portions of grains and starches at each meal. So 1/4 of your plate or your fist is the recommendation. So this again is for the average person. Everybody's going to be different. Someone who's an athlete, somebody who's in construction, somebody who's in a physically demanding job based on your diabetes medications and everything, these portions can be adjusted. So work with your dietitian, right? Yogurt or fruit, it's a good choice for dessert as well. Now, having said this, there are so many different eating patterns out there that people with diabetes can engage in. There is the low carbohydrates, there is the Mediterranean, there is the vegetarian. So if you're interested in any of them, you do talk to your dietitian and they can help you work on it based on your health conditions and the medications and everything that you're taking. This is just a general overview. Now let's look at some some food ideas or some breakfast or meal ideas. So we have porridge in the morning. It could be oatmeal, it could be cornmeal, or ghee or cocoa. When you're making your cocoa or cornmeal, please try not to strain it, because sometimes I find in a bit to make it look so smooth, you throw away all the, we call it chaff, but that's the fiber, which is good for you. So please, if you can chew cow foot, you should be able to eat your cocoa or your ghee without straining the flour. Because when you strain and throw away, that's the good stuff that you're throwing away. Now, when you make your cocoa, it's a cup and a half, and a cup here is 250 ml. And you want to add some nut to give you the protein. So we talked about balancing it that way. And then you could have like half a cup of fruit in it as well, especially if you're not using honey or any sugar in there, then the fruit becomes something to sweeten it for you, right? Another option could be having 2 slices of whole grain bread. So again, whole grain bread, not just whole wheat. If it's whole wheat, make sure you see the words 100% whole grain whole wheat. Then you know the whole wheat seed is intact. You could have that with a boiled egg or 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. You could have your coffee with milk, 2% milk as well. Okay, now some pancakes or injera. So that one, you would want to use a high fiber flour. So instead of using the regular white flour, or try to use or mix it with some chickpea flour or use some oat flour instead of the regular flour there, you would increase the fiber content, and you would also reduce the glycemic index by using those whole grain flours. Some people may use barley flour. That's also good that way. You could have that with some scrambled eggs. And then you could have your pancake with some fruit. And then again, your cup of coffee or tea with milk. And then you could have 2 pieces of moi moi, which is the steamed beans with your ogi and a little bit of fruit. So you would see that your breakfast is a combination of carbohydrates and protein. And there's some fruits there to give you a little bit more fiber and a little bit more vitamins as well. Now let's look at some lunch and dinner ideas. Okay, so there's the jollof rice here. That would also be like a cup or cup and a half, depending on who is eating it. So I would say a cup for a woman, maybe a cup and a half for male, that way as well. But if you're a woman who is very athletic and doing a lot of physical, then obviously we can individualize the portion sizes. I think I forgot to put the portion there, but it's a cup to a cup and a half. Again, your grilled chicken. So chicken breast, it could be a thigh, 2 cups of salad with some vinaigrette dressing, that would be good. If you want to eat a gushy stew, again, it's a gushy stew, and whether it's fish or chicken or beef or goat meat or whatever form of protein you put it in, at least a cup of a gushy stew. And one thing that I encourage my clients to do, a lot of the time their gushy stew has more egusi than the vegetable. Try to add more of the green leaves in your gushy stew to increase how much vegetable is in there. And then if you're eating it with eba or pounder yam or amala, then 1 cup of that. Wache or rice and beans, again, a cup and a half a cup of tomato stew, whether you're using fish, chicken, or beef, or a combination. And then you want to add some salad as well. A cup of palaver sauce, which is spinach sauce, 1 medium plantain or 3 slices of boiled yam, and then your fish and chicken as your protein. Then we have eba or ugali or so, whichever one you're eating, depending on which part of the continent you're from. You can have it with okra or spinach stew, a cup and a half, and then you have your fish or meat or chicken. A lot of the time, People use combination of it. So just be mindful of that. If it's one, it's okay. If you're used to using combination, again, just watch the portion quarter of the plate. We have cambulo with some tomato, cucumber, and cilantro salad. And then you would have your lemon and olive oil dressing. So cambulo is a combination of the corn and the beans. You would have protein in there as well. But if you wanted to have some nuts in your salad or some leftover chicken in your salad, then that's okay. Go ahead and have that. If you enjoy banku or kenke, then aim for like a cup or your fist. Again, you could have your pepper sauce, which is the tomato and the pepper sauce ground together, about half a cup of that. You can add some diced onions and tomatoes, half a cup of that, some avocado of that, and your grilled fish, whether it's tilapia or mackerel or snapper, enjoy that as well. And then there's fufu with soup. So whether it's light soup, pepper soup, or groundnut soup, about a cup of your fufu, a cup and a half of your soup. You could have more soup and less fufu if you want. Some of the tips I give my client is to add in more vegetables to your soup. So when you're making your light soup or pepper soup, don't just stop at tomato and pepper and onion. Add some zucchini, add some carrot, add some beans. I know people use the broad beans, lima beans. Add them as well. Add some celery, add any vegetables that you have that you can cook and blend together in that soup. It's okay. The soup may look a little bit thicker, but what happens is then you can eat a small amount of the fufu or the pounded yam, and you will still be full with the soup because the soup would be full of fiber and vegetables, right? And then you add whatever protein of choice. If you like sukwa, it could be chicken sukwa, beef sukwa. Make sure you add a lot of peppers in the sukwa, not just a few. Sometimes I find that it's just a few pieces of sukwa or bell pepper in the sukwa and then more meat. No, try to add more peppers in there with the onions. Add your cup of rice and a cup and a half of salad as well. Now some snacks, all right? So small banana with a quarter cup of peanuts unsalted, some roasted corn and peanuts. That's also a good snack, unsalted for both of them. You could have a slice of whole grain bread with a tablespoon of peanut butter, a medium apple with like an ounce of cheese, which is like if you put your 2 fingers together, that's your ounce of cheese, or maybe 4 cubes of cheese. Yogurt with some berries, again, plain yogurt. You add your own berries, and that's fine. If you enjoy popcorn, 3 cups of popped corn is also okay to have. So these are just a few snack ideas that you could have either between your meals or before you go to bed, that way as well. You want to limit how often you eat mandazi or puff puff or the pastries and the big goose and the chips, the plantain chips, and the, yeah, so just limit how often you eat it. Once in a while, again, so everything in moderation. And speaking with your dietitian, they will be able to help guide you to define what that moderation is in your context. Now, this is how the plate is supposed to look like. So we have some different food ideas there. Whether you're eating your banku with your fish, so you have your banku there, like your fish size, your pepper, your round pepper, which you can add some green pepper, some carrots in there to increase the vegetable content. And then you have some cut up tomatoes and onions, you have some avocados there. So when you do it this way, you realize that there's a lot of food on the plate, but not all of that is necessarily the banku or the kinki. So you're reducing how much of of sugar would end up in your blood. That's the goal of doing it this way. It's not to say that don't eat your food. It's just to say that I can still enjoy my food and my blood sugar would not go out of the roof. Okay. If you like wache or rice and peas, again, it's a quarter plate. You have your chicken, and the bigger portion of your plate is your vegetables. Now, if you don't eat like this and you're now starting, maybe you may want to start with, because a lot of the time people would put the food all over the wache, all on the plate, and then put the stew and other things on top of it. When you're starting, you can reduce it to half a plate or 3/4 of a plate and half a plate, and gradually get to where you need to go to whilst increasing the vegetable. One thing to note is that the goal is not to get you hungry. The goal is still to keep you full, but filled on a lot of things that are not going to give you so much sugar. So you would get some sugar in the blood, some carbohydrate from this, but that's not the only food that is filling your tummy. The vegetables are filling it, and because they don't come with a lot of carbohydrate, then your blood sugar doesn't spike. So that's the key point here. Now, when you reduce this way and you eat and you feel hungry, then it's okay to have a snack 2 or 3 hours after eating the meal. So don't think that I need to eat to keep me full for 6 hours, and therefore I'm going to eat a big amount. That is where it gets your blood sugar spiking up and staying up for a longer time. And that's where all the complications result. If we keep doing this over the long time and the blood sugar stays high years and years, then all the diabetes complications end up happening. Okay, again, the jollof rice is there as well. If you're doing an injera or a roti or chapati kind, again, you have it filling 1/4 of your plate. So that's like 1 injera or something like 8 or 9 inch injera. You have your meat and you have your vegetables as well. So now when we have to eat away from home, because we don't always necessarily eat at home. So if you have to go to a restaurant, you can make a special request if it's a sit-down restaurant, and don't be afraid to do that. You can ask for them to substitute some of the things that they use. So low-fat dressing, or instead of a regular dressing, or ask them to use a broth instead of a cream-based soup. You can ask for those. You can ask for the cooking method if there's something. Check for the cooking method on the menu. So it could be either be grilled or stir-fried or steamed instead of breaded or battered, right? Because those ones tend to be high in fat and also the carbohydrate because of the flour. You could ask for a yogurt-based dessert instead of high fat, high sugar dessert as well. And then of course your beverages, your tea, your coffee, your milk, you can't go wrong with that as well. And then if it's a buffet, then try not to overindulge. It's a good idea when you're going, try not to be hungry, because sometimes it's counterintuitive. I know that you think I'm going out, so I'm not going to eat. And then when I get there, sometimes our eyes are bigger than our stomach. And so you may pack a lot on the plate, and then you feel like you need to clear your plate. And once it goes in, it can come out. So try not to go when you're hungry. If you're going out, stick to your usual. If you're going out in the evening, stick to your usual eating habit. Have your breakfast, have your lunch, and then if it's dinner, you go there and you eat. Don't starve, just so you can go and eat a lot at the buffet. It's a good idea at the buffet when you go just to take a minute to go around and have an idea of what they have there, so you would make a mental selection in your mind. Because sometimes if we don't do that, then when we see this, oh, okay, I want this, Then you go forward and you say, oh, I want this. By the time you finish, you have a lot on your plate. And if you're somebody who's been taught, don't leave leftovers on your plate, then you feel like you need to finish your plate that way. Don't waste food. Sometimes some of our eating behaviors come from things that we've been told when we were younger. When you be told when you don't eat, and they'll be like, do you know how many people are hungry in parts of the world? Sometimes that affects us. So we feel like we need to finish everything on our plate. So if you're somebody like that, then you really need to be mindful when you get to a buffet to make sure that you do a quick scan around and decide what you want and pick only those ones and come sit down and enjoy. And remember that you can go for second helping if you really feel like you need that, but don't feel the need to fill up your plate. And then you want to pace yourself. So you want to eat slowly, enjoying your food. Very, very important. A lot of us have become mindless eaters. We just eat, 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 eat. We're eating, we're driving, we're eating, we're watching TV, we're eating, we're on the phone, we're eating, we're solving some other problems. So when you eat that way, sometimes you cannot really notice your fullness. You may find it later on. So pace yourself. If you're out there at a restaurant eating, enjoy your meal. Make sure you taste all the flavors that you're eating from. Now, if it's a potluck or you're going to friends or family, again, you want to make sure that you're following your normal eating plan, breakfast, lunch, or whenever it is that it is. Don't skip your meals. If you're not sure what you're going to serve, whether it's going to be high in fat or high sugar, it may not meet your dietary requirement or your goals, then try to take something, especially if it's a potluck, that you can eat. So you know that if all else fails, if I go there and whatever they serve, I cannot eat any of them, then at least you know the food that you made, you can enjoy it. And even there, you still want to follow the plate method. You want to make sure you're filling half of your plate with veggies, so go for your veggies first, add a little bit of carb and the protein, and enjoy that. Alcohol, that's a big one, right? If I have diabetes, can I drink? Yes, you can. You just want to do so in moderation. That's what the recommendation is. So it's not that because you have diabetes, you cannot drink. You can, but if you don't drink, please don't start. Okay, you don't have to start. I know there's a lot of information out there. Wine is good for you to protect your heart, your brain, all those things. That's for people who are already drinking. If you don't drink, you don't need to start. You're not missing anything. What is a drink? So women, it's usually recommended 1 drink a day. Men, about 2 drinks a day. 1 drink is 5 ounces of wine or 12 ounce beer or 1.5 ounces of liquor that way. So having said 1 drink a day, it doesn't mean that if you don't drink during the week and you only drink on weekends, then you want to pile up everything you didn't drink from Monday to Friday and have it for Saturday. No, it's 1 drink a day. There's no accumulation. So if you have diabetes, and especially if you're on medications, try to avoid drinking on an empty stomach. You do want to make sure that you're eating and drinking, or you have a full stomach before you drink. Why do we say that? Sometimes if you get drunk, the symptoms of low blood sugar kind of mimics when you're drunk. There's dizziness, there's slurriness of speech, and all those things, especially for those on insulin. You could be having a low blood sugar and you may think, oh, I'm just a little bit tipsy. So there's a danger there. So please try to make sure that you're eating when you're drinking. And when you have a full stomach, it's going to slow down how quickly that alcohol gets absorbed into your body as well. So that's why we kind of encourage making sure that you're eating and drinking. Eat something if you want to drink, okay? Avoid excessive alcohol intake because overall it's not good for your health. Now, how do we stay motivated? It's a lot of things to kind of go through. So how do we make sure that we are motivated to keep doing this over and over and over again every day that we get up, and not lose sight, not give up. Let me put it that way, because sometimes you can give up. It could be easy to. So making it a healthy affair, a family affair. Healthy eating as a family affair. Involve the whole family. Try to schedule time together to eat together. And I know it could be very, very difficult in this part of the world. In some part of Africa, families eat together, sometimes from the same bowl. You could see, even sometimes it's both adult and children, but at least where I grew up in Ghana, part of Ghana, all the kids, there are days where you see that you all share from the same bowl and you eat, and adults would also be eating all around the same time. And that makes it easy because we're making the same food and we are all sharing together. Here, sometimes because of work schedules, mom could be home, spouse could be home, the other spouse could be working, and so many other things. But at least try to schedule some time. If it's once a week, once every other week, if it's breakfast, if it's only lunch, if it's only dinner, something that everybody can look forward to. And also make sure that everybody participate in doing that. So have your kids writing the grocery list in there. If they're old enough, have them in the kitchen with you trying to prepare things or peel things for you or cut things for you. So then right from the get-go, we kind of inculcate that behavior of healthy eating into the family. And if the whole family is doing it, then it's very easier for you as somebody living with diabetes. Doesn't become like you're the only one who has to eat this and everybody else can have this. And that kind of gets discouraging, especially if you're the one making the food, okay? Another good thing is to plan ahead. So planning your meal, I know it sounds like a lot of work, but it's very, very important to do that. It makes sure that it helps you make sure that you're eating the right amount of food for good health. It allows you to prepare for different daily situations. So you know your schedule, you know if today you have a meeting or you're working a late shift or whatever. If you've planned, then that helps you know which foods to cook, which food not to cook. If you're going out to a family, you know you're having dinner here, so this week I don't need to cook dinner on Tuesday. Planning ahead helps you. And it also helps you to incorporate some of your favorite food, right, in there as well. And ultimately, we know that meal planning helps you to control your blood sugar and weight management. Now, physical activity is another important one, right? Helps in reducing stress. We cannot manage diabetes or control the blood sugar. This is a key component in diabetes management, right? Has so many benefits. So helping to reduce your stress level, giving you more energy, helps with weight control, helps lower your blood pressure, reduces the risk of diabetes for those who don't have diabetes. It's very good that way. Stronger bones reduces the risk of heart disease. So it's not just about diabetes and blood sugar. So many things, stress management, all of that. Physical activity is one of it. Now, what do you need to do? So aerobic exercise, the recommendation is about 150 minutes a week or 30 minutes of walking or jogging or running or whichever, dancing, whichever one you enjoy, 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And then on top of that, you want to add some resistance exercise, which is the ones that we do targeting different muscles, and you can target different muscles for different days. One day could be your shoulders, could be your biceps, your triceps, your lower back, all those things, your thigh muscles. And you do want to do it. It's usually 60 to 90 minutes a week. If you can do 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week, that's good. If you can't and you can only do 20 minutes, 5 4 times or 5 times a week, that's fine. If you can only do 10 minutes of that a day, enjoy that as well. But try to add that on top of your aerobic, because it's very easy for us to go for walks, and most people are good at doing that. But the resistant exercise is also very, very important when it comes to diabetes management. And then stress, last but not the least. Managing diabetes on its own can be very, very stressful. If you have diabetes, when you wake up, the first thing you think of is, how high is my sugar, or how much is my sugar this morning? You have to think of checking your sugar. You have to think of taking your medication. You have to think of, are you going to get a low, your physical activity? You have to plan for what you're going to eat, how much you're going to eat. If you're on insulin, there's that level of, okay, how much do I take? Do I reduce my dose? Do I take more? So there's so many things that somebody with diabetes has to do on top of everything else that everyone has to deal with, because you having diabetes does not necessarily spare you from all of life's other stresses. So your diabetes management or stress from diabetes is on top of what everybody else may be feeling, the financial. If you're a new immigrant here, some people, the Africa or other parts of the world, the whole family invested in them traveling over here. So everybody back home is relying on you for their school fees and everything that they need. So that's a lot of financial burden on you. There's a family, from the family. If you're here from Africa or anything and you don't have immigration status, that's another stress that you have to deal with. And then the other stress that we are all having to deal with these days in terms of the pandemic and everything. So all I'm saying is sometimes you may feel like you're overwhelmed, and sometimes it can manifest in so many ways where you find you're easily angry, or you're getting very emotional, or you find yourself crying, or whatever it is that you see that, okay, this is not how I usually am, or I'm going off my usual self. Please reach out for help. Seek for help. Talk to your doctor, talk to your nurse practitioner, talk to your diabetes educator. If you're involved in a faith or a religious organization, speak to your leaders. There's a lot of help out there for mental health. Do not be ashamed. Mental health is a real thing. It's not just tough it up. No, it's better to deal with it. There's no shame in saying that I feel overwhelmed, or I need to talk to someone, or I feel like I'm drowning. Reach out. And there are a lot of people out there and a lot of programs out there that would hold your hand and lift you up. So it's very important, especially when you have diabetes, because it doesn't matter how well you eat or how well you take your medications on time. If you have a lot of stress going on, your blood sugar is going to react and it is going to be high. So sometimes in diabetes management, we would actually refer out for therapy and counseling for people to work through that aspect of their health, to get all of that in control. And then we realize that once they do that, then we can come back and talk about the lifestyle, the food, the physical activity, and all those things. Please do seek help when you need it. So these are some resources out there. Diabetes Canada obviously is your primary place to go for anything related to diabetes. Dietitians of Canada, Unlock Food Dossier, and some other organizations out there. So thank you very much. Oshe Medase.